In Spanish, the word se is a multifunctional pronoun that shows up in many different ways. To understand how it works, we need to see the function that it has in every possible construction. Often, a literal English translation will not be enough, so in this lesson, I will explain how se is used in every way in Spanish. Considering the linguistics of the word, some concepts could be hard to get, so we're going to go from the most common principle to the least frequent. The first way is reflexive, where the subject acts on itself, consisting of a subject and a reflexive verb. Here, the subject performs and receives an action, like ella se lava. She washes herself. The key idea is that the action reflects back onto the subject, and in English, we can use words like myself, yourself, etc. to emphasize the action. This concept was thoroughly shown in my reflexive verb video. The second way is a reciprocal reflexive, where people do something to each other. In this case, the pattern can only follow plural subjects because they perform actions to each other or one another. An example is ellos se ayudan. They help each other. English uses each other, but Spanish uses se for the pronoun ellos. The third way is a replacement for the pronouns le, les. These pronouns are indirect objects, and when they're used with direct object pronouns like lo, la, los, las, Spanish changes le and les to se. This is done to avoid repeating the same consonant sound. So an example is le doy el libro a Juan. I give the book to Juan. Se lo doy a él. I give it to him. Here, it's not possible to say le lo doy, because Spanish doesn't repeat the same sound. Importantly, se doesn't mean anything by itself, so it's used contextually by replacing a pronoun. For more information on this concept, you can check out the video about direct and indirect object pronouns in Spanish. The fourth way is an impersonal construction with se that gives general statements with no specific subject that is doing the action. The pattern follows se with a third person singular verb, like se vive bien aquí. People live well here. Se dice que, it is said that. The English equivalent can use words like people, you, one, etc. The fifth way is a passive se, where the focus is on the action or the result, but not who did it. The pattern follows se plus a verb plus a noun or a subject, and the English equivalent is the use of the passive voice with the verb to be plus a past participle. An example is se venden casas. Houses are sold. Se habla español aquí. Spanish is spoken here. In one way, the passive se is a subcategory of the impersonal se, and it's very common to find in Spanish. The sixth way is an accidental se that removes blame from the person. This construction can be difficult to understand, but it is important because it shows actions as unintentional, especially in the past tense. Se me cayó el vaso. I dropped the glass, accidentally. The pattern follows se plus an indirect object plus a verb. Although Spanish past tenses are for future videos, the accidental se is needed in this case. The seventh way is a pronominal se that is added to verbs to express completion, change of state, or emotional involvement. Sometimes the pronominal se is added to verbs and changes their meaning, like ir, to go, irse, to leave, dormir, to sleep, dormirse, to fall asleep. This concept was also explained in my reflexive verb video, and what makes it special is the fact that verbs can exist without se. This detail matters because some Spanish verbs cannot exist without se. So, the eighth way is the lexical se that is used within inherently pronominal verbs. What this means is that some verbs require se as part of their form, so the verbs cannot exist without se, like quejarse, to complain, arrepentirse, to regret, atreverse, to dare, jactarse, to boast. In this case, there is no English equivalent, because the verbs always have se, so we memorize them as is. The ninth way is an emphatic or a spectual se that gives a subtle change in meaning. This construction is more advanced, but still important, because it adds intensity, completion, or personal involvement. It's also known as the telic se or dative of interest. In other words, it's a grammatical construction where an expression indicates that a person or thing is impacted heavily, like a verb that expresses completion. An example is comerse, to eat up, completely. Ella se come la pizza. She eats the pizza entirely. What makes this construction special is that it emphasizes a total act of eating something. It's also often perceived as more informal when referring to finishing an entire dish. At last, the 10th way of se is a middle se with a middle voice, where the subject undergoes a change without an external agent. In English, this construction happens when something happens by itself, or when the focus is on the result rather than the cause. An example is la puerta se abre. The door opens itself. El vidrio se rompe. The glass breaks itself. In English, we often say opens or breaks without anything else, but linguistically, the word itself is what the middle se refers to. Sometimes the word itself is added, but Spanish often prefers using se to specifically mark the action. In any case, this se is used when the subject is not an agent. Even so, it differs from the passive se because there is no agent that is implied, which makes it easy to recognize, like in the sentences se venden casas. Houses are sold. Las casas se derrumban. The houses collapse themselves. In conclusion, this is how se fully works in Spanish. By looking at this chart, you can see every construction and understand when to use it in which context, because the word is very common in written and spoken Spanish.